There's a danger that comes with studying great men. See, the greater the individual, the less reliable the stories become. Alexander may be the perfect example of this, because unlike many rulers, we do not simply inherit his victories. No, we inherit centuries of admiration, centuries of storytelling, centuries of people trying to explain the unexplainable. How does a man conquer the known world before the age of 30? How does a king defeat empire after empire without suffering a major battlefield defeat? How does a human being become a legend while still alive? The answers people give to these questions, they often tell us more about them than they even do about Alexander. See, the further back we travel into history, the fewer witnesses remain. Documents disappear, libraries burn, empires collapse, voices vanish. And eventually, historians find themselves standing in the ruins, ultimately trying to reconstruct entire lives from simple fragments. Alexander himself presents a unique challenge, because despite being one of the most famous figures in history, much of what people think they know about him comes from writers who lived centuries after he died. Perhaps the most famous of these writers was Plutarch, a Greek author writing during the Roman Empire, more than 400 years after Alexander's lifetime. 400 years. Imagine, if you will, someone today who's attempting to write the definitive biography of a person who lived before Shakespeare, a person who lived before the first permanent English colonies in North America, a person who lived before modern science even existed. That's roughly the distance we're talking about between Plutarch and Alexander. And yet, Plutarch remains one of our most important sources, not because he witnessed Alexander, not because he even knew Alexander, but because he had access to sources now lost forever. The memoirs, official accounts, campaign records, eyewitness testimony, entire libraries that, unfortunately, no longer exist. In a strange way, Plutarch acts like a bridge connecting us to a world otherwise swallowed by time. But bridges are imperfect. Every historian has their biases. Every writer has their preferences. Every storyteller chooses what they feel matters the most. And Plutarch was not writing military history. He was writing biography, characters, personality, human stories. If another historian wanted to explain how Alexander won a battle, Plutarch wanted to explain why Alexander became Alexander. That difference right there, that difference matters because it shapes the stories he chooses to tell. Plutarch was fascinated by moments, small moments, tiny details, conversations, even childhood anecdotes, all contributed to character traits. The sort of stories most military historians would ignore, these are the sort of stories audiences remember. And because of that, many of the most famous stories about Alexander's youth survive because Plutarch decided they were worth preserving. The problem is that we cannot always verify them. Many stand alone, they're unsupported, they're impossible to confirm, they're impossible to even disprove. So historians often face an uncomfortable choice. Do we reject them entirely, or do we treat them as something else? Perhaps not facts, but perhaps clues. Because even when stories are invented, they often reveal something important. Not necessarily about what happened, but about what people believed happened. And the people who told stories about Alexander believed something very specific. They believed greatness had always been visible, that the signs were obvious, that destiny had marked him from the beginning. This is perhaps why so many of his childhood stories follow the same pattern. The young Alexander is always different, always exceptional, always one step ahead of everyone around him. A child already behaving like the man history remembers. Were these stories true? Some perhaps, others perhaps not. But together, they still reveal something fascinating. By the time the later generations look back on Alexander's life, They no longer saw a prince, they no longer saw a king, they no longer even saw a human being. They saw a legend. And legends have a habit of rewriting childhood. Every hero becomes extraordinary. Every coincidence becomes prophecy. Every talent becomes destiny. Every childhood story becomes evidence. The question is not whether Alexander's legend changed history, because it unquestionably did. Instead, the question is whether Alexander himself believed those stories. Whether he believed the gods had chosen him, whether he believed greatness was his birthright, whether he believed destiny had already written his future. Because if he did, it might explain everything that followed. See, history loves childhood stories, especially when those stories belong to people who would later change the world. The problem is that childhood stories are rarely written for children. They're written for adults, they're written after the fact, they're written by people who already know how the story ends. Alexander suffers from this problem more than most, because once a man conquers the known world, every memory suddenly becomes important. Every conversation now gains new meaning. Every childhood moment becomes evidence. And yet, even allowing for exaggeration, some of the stories are honestly difficult to ignore, because whether they're true or not, they reveal the image that people had of Alexander, the image forming around him long before he wore a crown. Now, one of the most famous stories takes place when Alexander was still a boy. Not a soldier or a commander or not even a teenager, just a child moving through the royal court of Macedonia. At some point, Persian ambassadors arrived at Philip's court. For most children, such visitors would have been fascinating for obvious reasons. They came from the greatest empire on earth, a kingdom stretching from Egypt to India, a civilization of immense wealth and power. Most boys would have asked about treasures, palaces, jewels, exotic animals, the things children usually find impressive. Now, according to the story, Alexander asked different questions. Not about wealth, not about luxury, not about the Persian king. He asked about roads, distances, supply routes, the condition of the Persian army, the quality of its soldiers, the morale of its commanders. Now, if true, this story is extraordinary. Not because the questions are brilliant, but because they reveal a particular way of thinking. Most people will look at power and wonder what it possesses. Alexander supposedly looked at power and wondered how it worked. Was the story invented? Perhaps. Many historians suspect it was polished up over time, improved, refined, made more dramatic by generations of storytellers. Yet even if the details changed, the story survived for a reason, because it felt believable. It felt like it matched the man Alexander eventually became. A conqueror thinks differently. A conqueror notices different things. A conqueror studies possibilities invisible to everyone else. And whether Alexander possessed those qualities at 7 years old, that's impossible to know. But he certainly possessed them later. Now, the strange thing about ambition is that it often reveals itself early. Not always through grand actions or through obvious achievements, but sometimes through curiosity, obsession, or through the questions a person chooses to ask. Alexander, as we've established, grew up in an unusual environment. His father was transforming Macedonia into the dominant power of Greece. His mother filled his world with stories of heroes and destiny. Around him moved generals, ambassadors, kings, mercenaries, veterans, political schemers. The royal court was not a classroom. It was a living lesson in power. And Alexander absorbed everything. Every victory his father won, every diplomatic negotiation, every military campaign, every rumor of rebellion, every discussion of war. While other children played games, Alexander was watching an empire being built. Perhaps that's why the stories resonate, because even if they're embellished, they point towards something real. See, the young prince, he seemed restless. He was curious. He was hungry for knowledge, hungry for achievements, hungry for something ultimately larger. And that hunger appears again and again in the sources, across different stories, across different details and circumstances, yet the same underlying theme. Alexander always wanted more understanding, more accomplishment, more greatness. And nowhere is that theme clearer than in the story that made him famous long before he conquered a single city. A story involving a horse that nobody could control, a horse that nobody could ride, a horse that was about to become one of the most famous animals in history. At first glance, it seems like a simple story, the kind of tale parents would tell their children, the sort of anecdote that grows larger with every retelling. Yet this particular story survived for more than 2,000 years, not because of the horse, but because of what it supposedly revealed about Alexander. The ability to see what everyone else missed, the confidence to act when others hesitated, the refusal to accept limitations simply because other people did. Whether those qualities belonged to Alexander from birth, or whether history placed them there afterwards, that's a question worth asking. Because the answer tells us something important, not only about Alexander, but about the nature of greatness itself. Next came Bucephalus, and according to the stories, the moment a young prince proved he was different. Because as we know, every legend has a moment, a scene that's almost too perfect, a story so neatly constructed that historians instinctively become suspicious. Alexander has several of those, but none is more famous than the horse. The animal's name was Bucephalus, and according to the ancient sources, he was magnificent, large, powerful, expensive, a horse ultimately worthy of kings. There's just one problem. Nobody could ride him. The animal bucked, kicked, reared, refused all commands. Every attempt to tame him ended in failure. Experienced riders had failed. Veteran horsemen failed. The horse seemed simply uncontrollable. Eventually, Philip, he grew frustrated with this animal. This animal was becoming an embarrassment to him, a costly mistake, a beast unsuitable for service. The king reportedly ordered that it be removed. The horse was useless after all. The matter was settled, or so everyone had thought. Then a young Alexander stepped forward. Now this is the point where the story enters that strange sort of territory between history and legend. The place where ancient biography almost becomes theatrical. A place where every event seems designed to reveal character. Now, according to Plutarch, Alexander watched the horse carefully. While everyone else focused on its behavior, he focused on its fear. The horse was not wild, not truly at least. The horse was frightened, specifically frightened by its own shadow. Every movement, every shift in the sunlight, every dark shape moving beside it, the animal interpreted as danger. Nobody else had noticed this, at least according to the story, but Alexander had. So instead of forcing the horse into submission, he turned it toward the sun. The shadow disappeared. The horse calmed. And for the first time, someone climbed into the saddle. The horse obeyed. The crowd erupted. The impossible had just happened. A boy had succeeded where grown men had failed. If the story had ended there, it would already be memorable. But ancient writers rarely stopped there. They always add one final detail, one final line, a flourish, one final moment designed to reveal destiny. According to Plutarch, Philip watched the entire event unfold. And when Alexander returned safely from his ride, the king reportedly said, "My son, seek a kingdom equal to yourself. Macedonia is too small for you." Now, did Philip actually say those words? Nobody knows. In fact, if we're being honest, he probably didn't. At least, not exactly that way. But once again, historical accuracy is only part of the story. Because whether Philip said it or not, people believed he should have said it. And that matters. The story survived because it perfectly captured how later generations viewed Alexander. A boy capable of seeing solutions invisible to everyone else. A boy who approached problems differently. A boy who refused to accept that something was impossible simply because others had failed. Whether the horse story is completely true, partially true, or mostly invented, it still reveals something fascinating about Alexander's reputation. The sources constantly portray him as someone who notices what others overlook, someone willing to trust in his own judgment, someone unusually confident. Confidence itself is an interesting quality. In moderation, it becomes leadership. In excess, it becomes arrogance. Alexander possessed both. The difficulty is that success often makes them difficult to distinguish. When a man repeatedly achieves the impossible, what appears to outsiders as arrogance begins to look like justified confidence. And Alexander would spend much of his life blurring that line. The horse story also reveals something else, something equally important. Alexander was growing up under extraordinary pressure. His father was Philip, the most successful king Macedonia had ever known. He was a military innovator, a conqueror, a statesman, a man transforming the balance of power across Greece. How does someone follow up from that? How do you emerge from a shadow so large? Most sons never do. History is filled with many a tale of brilliant fathers followed by mediocre heirs. Power is easy to inherit, greatness is not. Yet from an early age, Alexander appears determined to compete, not only with his contemporaries, not only with his rivals, but with the expectations surrounding him. Every victory became a challenge. Every success raised the standard. Every achievement made the next achievement necessary. The horse was only the beginning. Because while Philip was building an empire, another influence was shaping Alexander's imagination. A force far older than Macedonia, far older than Philip, far older than Alexander himself. Stories. Stories of heroes, stories of warriors, stories of glory. Stories ultimately so powerful that they would shape the ambitions of a young prince long before he ever entered a battlefield. And among all those stories, there was one hero that stood above the rest: Achilles, the great warrior of Greek mythology, the man Alexander spent his entire life trying to surpass. Long before Alexander dreamed of conquering Persia, he dreamed of Achilles. Every civilization creates heroes, figures larger than life, figures who embody its values, its aspirations, its ideals. For the Greeks, no hero would loom larger than Achilles. He was strong, brilliant, flawed, dangerous, immortal in memory, if not even in life. Alexander grew up surrounded by stories of Achilles, not merely hearing them, but living them, studying them, admiring them. His mother encouraged it. After all, her family claimed descent from Achilles himself. Whether true or not, that hardly mattered to them. The claim existed, and claims always have power, especially when repeated throughout a childhood. Imagine, if you will, hearing from your earliest years that your ancestors were heroes, that greatness ran in your blood, that destiny awaited. Most people would simply dismiss such ideas. Alexander embraced them. He did not simply admire Achilles, he identified with him. The Iliad became more than a story. It became a model, a guide, a vision of what greatness looked like. And that might explain something important. Many rulers pursue wealth, they pursue power, they pursue security. Alexander seemed to pursue something different. He pursued glory. The kind of glory that survives death, the kind that Achilles pursued, the kind that Homer promised, the kind that was remembered forever. That pursuit would drive Alexander further than any army had marched before. It would carry him across deserts, across mountains, across continents. But first, he would have to survive something much closer to home. Because while Alexander dreamed of heroes, real politics continued around him. Real enemies, real conspiracies, real dangers. And soon, the man who had built Macedonia into a great power would ultimately fall. Philip's empire appeared stronger than ever. His enemies were retreating, his ambitions were growing, his victory still lay ahead. Then in 336 BC, everything changed. A king entered a celebration, a bodyguard drew a blade, and the future of Macedonia was rewritten in an instant. Empires are strange things. From a distance, they appear solid, permanent, unshakable, almost inevitable. Yet history often turns on moments lasting only seconds. A missed warning, a careless decision, a single blade. In 336 BC, Philip II stood at the height of his power. Everything he had spent decades building was finally coming together. The Macedonian army was unmatched. The Greek city-states had been subdued. His rivals had been defeated. His kingdom had become the dominant power in the Greek world. Even more importantly, Philip was preparing for something larger, something generations of Greeks had dreamed about: Persia. The greatest empire on earth, the ancient enemy, the kingdom that had once invaded Greece, the superpower that loomed over the eastern horizon. For centuries, Greek leaders had spoken about revenge. Philip was finally preparing to act. The invasion plans were underway. Troops were gathering. Commanders were preparing. The greatest campaign of Philip's life was about to begin. Yet, he would never see it. The assassination took place during a celebration, a public event, a wedding, the sort of occasion where rulers wanted to be seen, wanted to appear confident, wanted their people to witness their greatness. Philip entered the theater, unarmored, surrounded by crowds, by prestige, by success. Then everything went wrong. One of his bodyguards stepped forward, a man named Pausanias. The details remain frustratingly unclear. Ancient historians offer a variety of explanations, be it political motives, personal grievances, court intrigue, revenge, conspiracies. Like so much of ancient history, certainty remains elusive. What we know is simple. Pausanias rushed forward. A blade flashed. Philip fell. The king who had transformed Macedonia died almost instantly. For a brief moment, chaos threatened to consume everything he had built. Because kingdoms often depend on momentum, and momentum can disappear overnight. The great conqueror was gone. The architect was dead. The empire suddenly stood leaderless. And that created a dangerous question. Who came next? The obvious answer was Alexander, Philip's son, the prince, the heir. But succession is rarely simple, especially in ancient monarchies, especially in Macedonia. Royal families did not operate like modern governments. There were no peaceful transitions, no constitutional guarantees, no orderly handovers of power. There were only rivals, claimants, ambitious nobles, and men willing to kill for a crown. Alexander was 20 years old. 20. He was old enough to fight, old enough to command, old enough to dream of greatness. But many people doubted he was old enough to rule, and those doubts spread quickly. The enemies of Macedonia sensed weakness. Greek cities sensed opportunity. Foreign kingdoms watched carefully. Rivals within the royal court, they began calculating possibilities. To them, Philip had been the threat. Philip had been the genius. Philip had been the force holding everything together. His son? Son was just a boy. At least that's what they believed. And perhaps we should not be too quick to dismiss them, because from their perspective, the calculations made sense. Philip was one of the most successful rulers of his generation. Alexander had never ruled anything. Philip had spent decades proving himself. Alexander had inherited the throne. History often makes success appear inevitable, but nothing about Alexander's situation was inevitable. In fact, if we place ourselves in that moment, if we ignore everything we know about what comes next, the odds seem terrible. A 20-year-old king, a kingdom filled with enemies, a fragile coalition held together by one dead man, a military elite loyal to Philip, and a world waiting for signs of weakness. Most rulers would have spent the next few years trying to survive. Alexander was about to do something else entirely. Because the moment Philip died, the expectations changed. No longer a prince, no longer an heir, no longer a promising young man. Now Alexander had to prove himself, and he had to do it immediately. The stories about destiny would not save him. The stories about lightning and prophecies, they wouldn't save him. Heck, the stories about Bucephalus wouldn't save him. Only power could save him now. And power in the ancient world had to be demonstrated quickly, publicly, and decisively. The enemies of Macedonia expected hesitation, they expected uncertainty, they expected weakness. Instead, they got Alexander. And before long, the young king would make a decision so ruthless, so shocking, it would silence an entire generation. The world believed Philip's empire was about to collapse. The world was wrong. Every king inherits a kingdom. Few inherit a crisis. Alexander inherited both. And within months, he would face the first true test of his life, a test that would determine whether he became another forgotten ruler or the man history remembers as Alexander the Great. The rebellion was coming. The Greeks were watching. The crown was uncertain. And the young king had a choice. He could wait, he could negotiate, he could compromise, or he could teach the world a lesson they would never forget. Next time, we will begin to understand how the prince became a warrior and a king. Thanks for listening. This has been A Slice of History.